Imagine a library, not the kind with fluorescent lights and laminated floor signs, the kind carved into stone, soaked in sea salt, copied by hand onto palm leaf and bark for centuries. Now imagine someone walks in, looks around, and says, "Nobody's been here before me." That sentence, that single breathtaking act of not looking carefully enough, that's what the word discovery has always really meant. There's a story most Filipinos were handed in school. Ferdinand Magellan arrived in 1521. He planted a cross. He met people. The textbooks implied, sometimes gently and sometimes not, that this contact was somehow the beginning of history, the beginning of civilization on those islands, as if the 7,000-plus islands were simply waiting, quiet, empty, patient, for someone to notice them. Borneo disagrees. Borneo has the receipts. The royal genealogical records of Brunei, the Salasila Raja Brunei, document political and trade relationships with the Philippine archipelago stretching back roughly 3,000 years before Magellan's ships were ever built. Not myths, not oral whispers passed through unreliable memory. Written dynastic records, court documents, genealogies that name rulers, trace bloodlines, and chart political alliances across the Sulu Sea, with the kind of administrative precision that only functions when there are real kingdoms on both ends of the arrangement. You can't have a trade treaty with a place that doesn't exist. That detail matters more than it seems at first, because the Brunei Sultanate wasn't keeping records of a distant wilderness. It was documenting relationships with organized polities, structured societies with their own rulers, their own laws, their own maritime networks. The Tagalog word datu doesn't come from Spanish. It predates Spanish by centuries. So does the social architecture the word describes. Stop here for a moment, because to understand what those Bornean records actually mean, we need to go further back, not forward. There's a concept in maritime archaeology called the Austronesian Expansion. Around 3000 BCE, possibly earlier by some estimates, seafaring peoples began spreading outward from what is now Taiwan, moving south and east through island Southeast Asia with extraordinary navigational skill. They carried cultivated rice, domesticated pigs, specific pottery traditions, and languages that would eventually evolve into Tagalog, Cebuano, Ilocano, and hundreds of other tongues across the Pacific and Indian Oceans. These weren't desperate refugees drifting on logs. These were intentional voyagers, skilled navigators reading stars and currents the way other people read roads. The Philippines wasn't a destination they stumbled upon. It was a node in a network. And here's where the nested story clicks into place. Really place. The Laguna Copperplate Inscription, discovered in 1989 near the Lumbang River, is dated to 900 CE. That's more than 600 years before Magellan. It's written in a script related to Old Malay and Sanskrit-influenced Kawi. It references a place called Tondo. It references debt forgiveness. It references a bureaucratic system complex enough to require a written legal document to resolve a financial dispute. Debt forgiveness. In 900 CE, in a place supposedly waiting to be discovered 6 centuries later. Precisely later. But there's a detail. The inscription didn't ask for permission to exist. It simply existed. And when a man named Antoon Postma, a Dutch anthropologist and Hanuno-Mangyan script expert, finally translated it in the early 1990s, the document rewrote the beginning of Philippine written history in a single afternoon. That's what real discovery looks like, not a flag planted in someone else's soil. A scholar sitting quietly with a corroded piece of copper, letting the past speak for itself. But the Brunei records take it even further back than Tondo. By the way, the genealogical documentation from the Sultanate of Brunei describes the Sulu archipelago not as a frontier, but as a partner. The Sultanate of Sulu itself, formally established in 1405 CE, grew from trade relationships and intermarriages that had been accumulating for generations before its founding. Rulers exchanged daughters and sons, ports exchanged spices, cloth, ceramics, and gold. The South China Sea was not a barrier, it was a highway. Gold. There's a detail here that most people walk past without stopping. When Spanish chroniclers arrived in the 16th century, they were startled by how much gold the local population wore and used. Miguel de Loarca wrote about it. Antonio Pigafetta, who sailed with Magellan, documented Raja Humabon of Cebu receiving the Spanish fleet while decorated in gold. The Spanish assumed this was novelty, accumulated slowly, perhaps through some recent luck. Philippine gold craft traditions date to at least 900 CE based on archaeological finds. Burial goods from the Aten death masks in Iloilo. The golden Tara of Agusan, whose discovery near a riverbank in 1917 placed a fully realized, iconographically sophisticated golden figure, consistent with Hindu-Buddhist artistic traditions, right in the middle of Mindanao. Nobody commissioned that piece from a passing stranger. It grew from centuries of connected spiritual and artistic tradition reaching across the Malacca Strait and beyond. The work exists. The hands that made it are gone. The culture that shaped those hands is not. This is the strange gravity of very old things. They outlast the arguments about them. The Laguna Copperplate didn't need historians to validate it. The gold Tara didn't need an academic consensus to be beautiful and real. These objects simply persisted, buried, submerged, corroded, until the world was finally ready to hear what they were saying. There's something almost mythological about that patience, and this is where the story curves back towards something uncomfortable. Not about Magellan specifically. He was a navigator doing what navigators did in 1521, operating within a completely specific worldview and set of imperial instructions. The discomfort is about what happened to the story afterward, how the colonial period didn't just change the Philippines politically, it attempted to redate the Philippines, to make 1521 feel like year zero, the Spanish cross at Cebu as Genesis. Languages were suppressed. Baybayin, the indigenous script that shares ancestry with the writing on the Laguna Copperplate, stopped being taught. Oral traditions were reframed as superstition. The polities that had governed Luzon and Visayas through sophisticated Datu systems were reclassified as primitive arrangements waiting for civilization to arrive by ship. The myth required the erasure of the library. That's not a conspiracy. That's colonial logic operating exactly as it always does in every context where it has ever existed. It doesn't need a secret plan. It just needs everyone to stop asking when the library was built. But the records persisted. In Brunei, in the National Museum in Manila, in corroded copper left in River Silt. In the grammatical structure of languages, nobody fully replaced. In the gold. But there's a detail. The Philippines was not discovered in 1521. It was encountered. There's a difference between those two words that entire civilizations live inside. Stop. The Bornean royal records don't diminish what came after contact with the Spanish. They don't erase the complexity of what colonialism built or the culture that grew from that collision. What they do is restore a timeline. They hand back centuries that were quietly borrowed and never returned. A library doesn't become real the moment a stranger walks in and is surprised to find it there. Go back to that image now. The library carved in stone and salt and palm leaf. Someone walks in and says, "No one has been there before." Behind him, the shelves are full. The ink is old. Some of the entries are in Sanskrit-adjacent script, some in early Malay, some in a form of Baybayin that predates the colonial encounter by centuries. The oldest genealogy on the shelf connects rulers in Borneo to rulers in Sulu to rulers in Tondo, in an unbroken chain of political relationships that stretch back before any European cartographer put those islands on a map. The library was always there, but there's a detail. The question was never whether it existed. The question was whether the person walking in was willing to be still long enough to read it.